It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sun spills lazily through the kitchen window, and the only sound is the slow ticking of the wall clock. I was sorting through a stack of mail, and I almost didn't bother opening the usual junk, circulars, and bank statements. But then, tucked neatly between a gardening catalog and a supermarket coupon, was an envelope from a mortgage lender I didn't recognize. I'm retired. I don't have a mortgage. Not anymore. I almost tossed it aside, but something told me to look. When I did, my breath caught. A loan, $950,000. My name, my social security number, my signature. But I never signed anything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat down, folded my hands, and stared out the window for a long time because I knew exactly who had done it. My daughter. My only child. What would you do if your child tried to take your life from you? If you're yet to subscribe, hit that button. She had taken out a home loan in my name, behind my back, to buy a house she thought I'd never discover. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman she betrayed had once built empires from the ashes of loss. And this time, I wasn't just a victim. I was her reckoning. The house was still. No television playing in the background. No kettle whistling. Just the sound of my slippers moving across the hardwood floor as I carried the day's mail into the living room. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters, the scent of lemon cleaner still clinging to my fingertips. I didn't expect anything important. Bills, catalogs, maybe a donation request from the local animal shelter. I sorted through the envelopes absent-mindedly, not in a hurry, not even particularly curious. And then I saw it. A sleek white envelope. No logo. Just the name of a mortgage company I'd never heard of. Addressed to me. My full name. No error. No misspelling. I almost tossed it into the trash pile. Almost. But something about it made me pause. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was the subtle way the envelope felt heavier than the others, like it was carrying something that wasn't just printed ink on paper, but something weighted with consequence. I slid my finger beneath the seal, opened it with the care of someone defusing a bomb, and pulled out the crisp, folded documents inside. The first word I saw was loan, then $950,000, then, in bold, notice of payment due. I blinked. Once, twice. It didn't make sense. I had paid off my home 22 years ago. I hadn't applied for any loans. I hadn't co-signed. I hadn't walked into a bank or spoken to a lender. My fingers tightened around the paper. The numbers danced on the page, and for a second, I wondered if this was some kind of mistake. But then I saw it. My signature. Or what was supposed to be my signature. It looked close, eerily close, but not quite right. The curl of the S was off, the spacing too tight. It was a forgery, but a good one. And that's when I knew. I didn't need to guess. I didn't need to play detective. There was only one person in my life who had access to my documents, my social security number, and my private details. Only one person would have reason to try something like this, and truly believe she would get away with it. My daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even set the paper down. I just sat there, perfectly still, the document trembling slightly in my hands, while my face remained calm. Because what she had done wasn't just illegal, it was personal. She had borrowed against my trust. She had mortgaged my name, my reputation, my life, without hesitation. But what she didn't realize was that I had spent decades building more than just a home. I had built a legacy. And if she thought I was going to sit quietly while she used me like a stepping stone, then she hadn't learned a thing from the woman who raised her. I folded the letter slowly and deliberately and let it rest in my lap. My hand reached for my phone, then stopped halfway. Number not yet. I stayed there in the stillness, the letter's weight pressing down harder than paper should. The numbers kept pulling my gaze like gravity. $950,000. Nearly $1 million. Borrowed. In my name. The ink didn't smudge. The numbers didn't change. It wasn't a typo. It was real. A debt that didn't belong to me, tethered to my identity like a noose waiting to tighten. The longer I stared at it, the quieter everything else became. The ticking of the clock, the soft creak of the ceiling fan, even the hum of the refrigerator, all of it faded, drowned beneath the weight of that one staggering number. My hand gripped the edges of the paper, but I still didn't cry. I didn't allow myself the comfort of a breakdown. Instead, something colder settled in me. A terrifying calm. The kind that only arrives when you've walked through fire before and come out knowing the heat doesn't scare you anymore. I had seen worse in this life, and the daughter who forged my signature hadn't lived long enough to know just how sharp I could become when pushed into a corner. I leaned back into the sofa, my eyes scanning the entire loan document from top to bottom. Property location, monthly payment, fixed interest rate, insurance, notarized papers. Every line screamed planning. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't desperation. It was a strategy. My daughter had orchestrated this with precision. She knew which accounts to pull from. She knew my maiden name, my mother's birthplace, and the name of my first pet, details only a daughter would know. She had built a financial castle on top of my bones and was now living inside it like a queen. And yet, despite the treachery, my thoughts didn't race. They slowed like molasses in the dead of winter. There's a strange clarity that comes with betrayal when the wound is fresh but doesn't bleed. I wasn't thinking about revenge. Not yet. I was thinking about what kind of person she had become to justify this. What stories had she told herself to sleep peacefully in a house funded by her mother's stolen identity? The paper trembled slightly in my hand, but my face held still. I was already crafting the next move. The thing about daughters is that they often forget their mothers were women before they became parents. Women who survived heartbreak, who knew how to rebuild from dust, who kept receipts, not just literal ones, but the kind you carry in memory long after the ink has faded. She thought this number, $950,000, was power. She thought it meant control. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I once walked away from a marriage, a company, and a life's work with nothing but grit and silence, and still came out with more than anyone expected. She had taken my name. Now she would see what came with it. It wasn't just the money. That was the surface of it, the sharp, immediate sting. But the deeper cut came from something far older, something that began long before she ever learned how to write my name. Because this wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just theft. This was personal. She didn't just take my credit. She took my story, my effort, my sacrifice, and she signed her name over it, as if it had never been mine. I stared out the window, the paper still folded in my lap, and let the memories come. They didn't knock. They barged in. I remembered her first day of kindergarten, her tiny hand gripping mine, the pink bows in her hair trembling as she fought back tears. I had worked the night shift before that, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but I showed up like I always did, smiling, steady, hers. I remembered the year she broke her arm on the monkey bars and how I drove through a thunderstorm with one headlight out just to get to the hospital in time. I remembered skipping meals so she could go on school trips, pawning my engagement ring so she wouldn't feel less than the other girls in their expensive ballet shoes. I gave her everything, not because I had it in abundance, but because she was my daughter. Because I believed that love, when given without conditions, could shape a better future. I thought I was building her character, teaching her strength. But somewhere along the way, she learned something else entirely. She learned entitlement. She learned that my giving would never stop, that my name was hers to use, that because I loved her, she could take without asking. I never imagined I'd become a stepping stone in my own child's ambition. It wasn't just a loan. It was a signature she didn't earn, a name she didn't respect, a lifetime of trust, leveraged for square footage and marble countertops. She used the very life I built for her and turned it into a weapon against me. Like I was just a name on a form, a number on a credit report, a line to be crossed for the sake of comfort. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not that she bought a house, but that she never thought I'd find out. She didn't think I'd be sharp enough to notice. She didn't think I'd fight. She still saw me as the woman who packed her lunches and waited at the window when she was past curfew. She thought I'd accept it, that I'd swallow it like all the other disappointments she thought I didn't see. But she forgot. She forgot I'm the one who taught her to write, to read contracts, to carry herself with pride. And she forgot that I don't just survive betrayal, I study it. So while she walks barefoot through her stolen hardwood floors, sipping coffee made in a stolen kitchen, she doesn't know that the woman she stole from is already watching, already planning, already rising. And I won't knock. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, letter in hand, the silence of the house pressing in like fog. Outside, the moonlight spilled over the garden I once planted with her on a spring afternoon, back when her hands were small enough to wrap around mine, and her laughter was the loudest thing in the world. I kept asking myself the same question, over and over again, not to understand her decision, but to try to understand where I had gone wrong. I raised her better than this. She wasn't raised in greed. She was raised in grace. She wasn't taught deception. She was taught dignity. I gave her what I never had: stability, safety, love that didn't come with a price tag. I didn't spoil her with things. I poured into her with time. I was there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every recital. I used to sit in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else, tears in my eyes as she twirled across those hardwood floors in her glittered leotard. She was always reaching for something. First trophies, then acceptance, then control. And I cheered her on, believing that one day she would use that fire to light her path, not burn down mine. There was a time when she'd crawl into my bed after nightmares, her little voice trembling as she asked if monsters were real. I'd hold her close and whisper, "No, baby, not while I'm here." I didn't know that one day I'd wake up and realize the monster wasn't under the bed. It was the little girl I had tucked in every night. And she was no longer asking for comfort. She was taking whatever she wanted. What kind of mother does that make me? What did I miss? Was it in the way I always forgave too quickly? In the silence I chose when I should have corrected? Did I confuse unconditional love with open doors that never needed knocking? I kept every birthday card she ever made me. Crayon drawings with crooked hearts and stick figures holding hands. "You're my hero, Mommy." That's what she used to say. I wonder if she meant it, or if those words were just the early signs of a performer learning her first lines. Because somewhere between ponytails and prom dresses, the girl I raised disappeared, and in her place grew a woman who thought love was leverage and kindness was weakness. She used to sing herself to sleep. I'd hear her humming in the next room, soft and out of tune. Now I wonder if she still sings, if she feels anything at all. If, when she walks into that house she stole with my name, there's a flicker of shame in her chest, or if the marble floors drown it out. I raised her better than this. But maybe the daughter I thought I knew never really existed. Or maybe she's still in there, buried beneath years of choices and justifications. Either way, she's about to meet her mother again. But not the one who packed lunches, the one who doesn't play nice, Everyone expected fire. That I would march into her world, voice raised, demanding answers she wouldn't be ready to give. That I would shame her in public, or pull her into some explosive showdown she couldn't wriggle out of. Even she expected it, I think, that I would be loud, dramatic, broken. That the betrayal would erupt out of me like a mother scorned, finally pushed too far. But that's the thing about assumptions. They're always built around who people think you are, not who you become in silence. The confrontation didn't happen in her house. It didn't happen in court. It didn't even happen behind closed doors. It happened over coffee at a quiet little cafe she chose. Stylish, urban, the kind of place with marble counters and baristas who remember your name. She had texted me the night before, chipper and unsuspecting. "Let's catch up, Mom? I've missed you." I said yes. She arrived first, in sunglasses too big for her face and a coat too expensive for her budget. I walked in with steady steps, sat across from her, and let her take the lead. She smiled like nothing had happened, like she wasn't living in a house tied to a name that wasn't hers. I stirred honey into my tea and listened as she spoke. She talked about flooring upgrades and plans for a summer garden. She named contractors, quoted interior designers. Every word was a performance. She spoke as though she had built this life from scratch. She didn't know I already held the blueprint in my hand. Not once did she mention the mortgage, not the loan, not the paper trail. Just plans, projects, and filters for her next social post. I nodded politely, offered compliments where needed. I let her believe I was still in the dark. She kept watching me, though, testing the waters, trying to read my face. She knew something had shifted, but couldn't place it. That's what makes silence powerful. It keeps them guessing. And I wasn't there to feed her guilt or give her permission to explain away what she'd done. I was there to look her in the eye one last time before everything changed. There was a moment when she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm really glad we did this," she said. I smiled and said, "Me too." That was it. No confrontation, no accusations, no hints of the storm I'd already set in motion. I finished my tea, stood, and left her sitting there in her curated life, still believing the foundation she built would hold. The truth hadn't hit her yet, but it would. And when it did, she'd realize that the scariest confrontations don't come with shouting. They come with stillness. And a mother who walks away before the fire even starts. The morning after that cafe meeting, I got in my car without saying a word to anyone. No makeup, no perfume, just a coat, my handbag, and a mind made up. I didn't tell her I was coming. I didn't tell anyone. There was something about seeing it with my own eyes, standing in front of the life she built with my name, that felt necessary. Like reading the last page of a book you already know ends badly, just to make peace with the story. The neighborhood was newer than I expected. Clean lines, perfect landscaping, a world manicured to look effortless, though everything about it screamed performance. Houses like modern trophies, each one trying to outshine the next. Hers sat on the corner lot. Oversized windows, pale stone, custom shutters. It looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. The kind of place people post online and tag with words like "number blessed" and "number dream home," never admitting what was sacrificed to get it. I pulled up and parked across the street. I didn't get out right away. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the front porch, the new door, the fresh mulch by the walkway. I imagined her walking out, keys in hand, coffee in the other, acting like the world owed her this. Maybe it had become real to her. Maybe in her mind, the lie had settled in as truth. The house was hers, because no one had told her otherwise. Not yet. I stepped out of the car, crossed the street, and stood on the curb. I didn't go any closer. I didn't need to. From where I stood, I could see the pieces. The designer chairs by the window, the brand new car in the driveway, the security camera mounted just above the garage. Ironic, really, how hard she worked to protect a home she never truly owned. I didn't knock. I didn't take pictures. I just stood there, coat wrapped tightly around me as the wind picked up. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage or heartbreak. I felt clarity. I didn't drive straight home. After standing in front of that house, I needed air that wasn't curated. I needed space that didn't reek of dishonesty masked as achievement. So I took the long road back, past the old bakery we used to visit on Saturdays, past the dance studio where I once sat in folding chairs, cheering her on through crooked pirouettes and forgotten routines. She had never been the best on the stage, but she was always the most confident. That was her gift. She believed in herself, even when there was no evidence she should. I admired that. I still do. But there's a line between confidence and entitlement. And somewhere along the way, she stopped walking that line and started bulldozing it. I pulled into a quiet park just before sunset. There was no one there but a jogger and an old man feeding birds. I sat on a bench under the rustling branches of a sycamore and let my thoughts catch up to my silence. I'd given her everything, not in luxury, but in foundation. She didn't grow up with diamond earrings or summer homes, but she had something better: safety, consistency, values. She had a mother who never missed a school meeting, who learned how to make her favorite meals even when money was tight, who clapped even when the performances were terrible. I didn't raise her to chase money. I raised her to create meaning. But she traded meaning for marble countertops. And what pained me most wasn't the deception. It wasn't even the forged documents or the bold theft of a name she didn't earn. It was that she didn't think she needed permission. Not as a daughter. Not as a person. She decided that because I gave her life, she could take from it whenever she pleased. And I wondered, when did I teach her that? Was it the way I said yes too quickly when she asked for help? Was it the way I cleaned up her messes and called it protection? Or maybe it was the way I swallowed my disappointment when she started talking over me in rooms full of people, as if my voice no longer carried weight in her world. I wanted her to be strong. I wanted her to walk into rooms with her head high, but I never wanted her to walk over people to get there, especially not me. She had taken what I built, used my name as her stepping stone, and then tried to erase the part where I ever existed. But the thing about roots is that they run deep, and you can't cut them without the whole tree shaking. I sat in that park until the light dimmed and the birds quieted. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the day the envelope arrived. The tears dried up when the clarity set in. She thought I was weak. Fragile. She thought I was just a shadow of the woman I had been. But I had never stopped being her mother. And mothers know when to nurture and when to protect. Not just their children, but themselves, their dignity, their legacy. I pulled out my notebook and began to write, not the letter. That would come later. But a list, a plan, the names of people I would call, the legal steps I needed to finalize, the assets that would be protected, the strings I would untangle. I didn't write with rage. I wrote with resolve. This wouldn't be a war. It would be a reset. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to punish someone. It's to remove the access they never had the right to in the first place. She thought she was smart. She thought she could live in that house, throw brunches on the back patio, tag photos with captions like, "Earned, not given," and that I would stay quiet forever. But I gave her everything. And now I was reclaiming the one thing she had always assumed came free. Me. My support. My silence. My name. She could have had all of it, the honest way. But she chose shortcuts. And I was done making the road easy for someone who thought the rules didn't apply. Sometimes the people you love the most betray you the deepest. And sometimes, walking away from them isn't cruel. It's wisdom. It's healing. It's survival dressed in soft resolve. And I had finally remembered who I was before I became her mother. And that woman? She didn't beg to be respected. She demanded it, without raising her voice. This was the house she risked everything for. The one she stole for, lied for, built with bricks of deceit and furnished with denial. Every piece of it reflected her obsession with status and the belief that if it looked good enough, no one would question how it came to be. She thought the world would applaud the facade. And maybe it had, for a while. But facades crumble faster than foundations. Pause for a second. What would you have done in my place? I turned back toward the car, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. I didn't look back. Not once. The plan was already forming, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. The house wouldn't stay hers. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because it never was to begin with. It bore my name, my credit, my sacrifice. And if she thought she could erase me from the story she'd stolen, she underestimated how much I'd already written. By the time I slid back into the driver's seat, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Take back what was mine, and let her watch it disappear. One deed, one signature, one truth at a time. I let a week pass. I wanted her to settle into the illusion that everything was fine, that she'd dodged something, that I was too naive or too old to see what she'd done. I went to brunch with her, smiled during a charity event she invited me to. I let her introduce me to friends and realtors as my lovely mother, who's just so supportive. Supportive. That word echoed in my mind like a taunt. I wasn't supporting her. I was watching her build a house of cards with my name on the deed. But I wasn't going to knock it down with my hands. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. So, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Thomas Black, my late husband's oldest friend, former partner at the law firm that once protected our assets through 2 recessions and 3 acquisitions. Now retired, but still sharper than anyone twice his age and twice as ambitious. He answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said. Not surprised, just ready. I told him everything, calmly, cleanly. I didn't cry. I laid out the timeline, the documents, the forged signature, the house, the loan, the betrayal. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long pause, the kind that lets the weight of something land without rushing it. "She used your name," he said slowly. "Your credit, your identity." "She used my life," I corrected. That's when he gave me another name. Quiet, discreet, and as invisible as smoke. A private investigator who had once uncovered embezzlement for a Fortune 500 CEO without so much as making the morning paper. His reputation wasn't built on headlines. It was built on precision. I met him the next morning at a small cafe off the highway. No suit, no briefcase. Just a man with a sharp gaze and the kind of voice that never needed to be raised to be heard. I handed him the documents, the forged papers, the credit reports, the mortgage statement. He asked one question. "What exactly do you want?" I didn't hesitate. Everything. I wanted every move she made traced, every bank account, every shadow transaction, every person she spoke to about the house. I wanted evidence, facts, footprints she thought she'd hidden. I wasn't going to fight her in front of anyone. I wasn't going to drag her name through court or create a spectacle. That's what she would expect. A public scolding, a legal scuffle she could play victim in. Number I would do this cleanly, quietly. And when the moment came, I would present her with everything not in anger, but in clarity. The truth, her actions, her consequences, all laid out in black and white. She would never see it coming. Because she still believed the tea was a symbol of forgiveness. Because she still thought silence meant surrender. But silence is just another kind of storm. One that doesn't make a sound until it hits. It didn't take long. Less than 2 weeks after that quiet meeting with Thomas Black, the first envelope arrived. No return address. No bold markings. Just a thick manila file slipped under my front door early one morning before the neighborhood even stirred. I didn't need to guess who it was from. I carried it into the kitchen like it was radioactive, set it down beside my coffee cup, and opened it with the same calm I'd carried since this all began. Inside was the truth. At first, it was just what I expected. The mortgage documents, the traced emails between the lender and a third-party consultant she'd hired. The trail of forged communication meant to give the transaction a veneer of legitimacy. But beneath that, stapled to the back of the stack, were things I hadn't prepared for. Credit cards in my name. Opened months ago. Quietly used. Small charges at first, just enough to stay under the radar. A flight. A spa retreat. Designer clothes billed to department stores I hadn't stepped foot in for years. She hadn't just borrowed money. She'd built a double life with my credentials. The investigator's notes were meticulous. Line by line, he documented the dates, the banks, and the IP addresses. There were voice recordings from phone calls she'd made pretending to be me. Call logs showing how she timed them, early morning, just before my typical wake-up hour. She knew my schedule too well. She used my routines as her cover. Then came the rental agreements, 2 storage units under my name. One in a city I hadn't visited in over a decade. And in the notes beside it, a chilling line. Likely used to conceal assets during financial maneuvering. I sat back in my chair, the papers sliding slightly from my lap to the table. My pulse didn't race. I'd moved beyond shock. What I felt now wasn't even anger. It was grief. This wasn't a mistake made in panic. It wasn't a desperate grab at something out of reach. It was intentional, calculated, long-term. My daughter had crafted this like a side business, one where I was the foundation, the funding, and the fall guy. I remembered the first time she asked me about credit. She was 18. She wanted to apply for a small loan for a used car. We sat in the living room with her laptop, and I walked her through the application, line by line, teaching her the weight of her signature. She had nodded eagerly, grateful, curious. I thought I was preparing her to be responsible. It turns out I was training her to forge. I closed the file slowly, placed it on the counter, and stared out the window. She had used my life as scaffolding for her empire of lies, and it was only beginning to unravel. The worst part wasn't that she'd stolen. The worst part was how easily she did it. Like she thought I'd never catch up. Like she believed I wasn't still 10 steps ahead. I stood in the center of my study, the same room where I used to keep her school awards in a cherrywood cabinet, now repurposed as a war room. The file from the investigator lay open beside my laptop. Every document, every transaction, every trace of her greed sat in tidy rows, like a crime scene reconstructed for the jury. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for a verdict. I already knew the truth. Now it was about leverage. I taught her how to walk, how to steady herself when the world shifted beneath her. I taught her to tie her shoes, to look both ways, to speak with confidence, and to sit with poise. I walked beside her through every phase of life, shielding her when necessary, stepping back when she needed space. But this betrayal wasn't the result of independence. It was entitlement disguised as ambition. She thought she'd graduated from my lessons. What she didn't realize is that some lessons come at the end, not the beginning. So I moved. Quietly, deliberately, The first thing I did was meet with my financial advisor. He was younger than Thomas, more polished, all spreadsheets and digital portfolios. He spoke in percentages and growth charts, unaware that the woman sitting across from him was preparing for a different kind of return. I had him liquidate certain assets, old trusts, dormant accounts, and investment property tucked away in Oregon that no one in the family even remembered. Everything was redirected, quietly, into protected accounts under a newly formed LLC. She couldn't touch it, couldn't trace it. Then came the will. It was rewritten in one afternoon. The same way she'd written me off as irrelevant, I wrote her out of every line, every clause, every future. I didn't remove her in rage. I removed her like a dead weight. And for the first time in years, the document felt lighter, more honest. While she smiled over dinner with friends in the house, my name secured, I signed papers that changed the ground beneath her feet. She didn't know it yet, but the tides had already turned. The power she thought she had was borrowed, and the lender had come to collect. She still texted occasionally. "Love you, Mom." Casual, shallow, as if she sensed the shift in my energy but couldn't quite place it. I responded politely, never with anger. I let her believe the mask still worked. But every time I read those messages, I remembered her as a child, how she'd fall and look back at me, waiting to see if it was okay to cry. Now I wondered if she'd cry at all when this fall comes. Because this one won't be on scraped knees. This will be on marble floors and granite countertops and illusions made of glass. She thought she'd outgrown me. But she forgot. Before she learned to climb, I taught her how to stand. Now it was time to teach her how to fall. The hardest part of a long game is staying still when everything in you wants to move, to lash out, to confront, to scream that you know, that you've seen everything, that the mask they're wearing is already cracked. But that's the thing about masks. They fall faster when you don't reach for them. Everyone had underestimated me. My daughter, most of all. She saw my silence as softness, my patience as fragility. She mistook the way I held her hand in childhood as a sign of weakness, forgetting that those were the same hands that signed every check for her education, negotiated every deal with her college board, and paid off the mortgage she now pretends to have earned. I didn't say much in those early days because I didn't need to. But quiet doesn't mean blind. And grace isn't the absence of boundaries. It's the wisdom to wait until the weight of truth is heavy enough to crush a lie on its own. Even her friends joined the chorus. Smiles at brunch, side eyes when I spoke, polite dismissal when I asked questions. I saw it in their glances, the unspoken assumption that I was just the sweet, clueless mother, floating around the edges of her daughter's success like a well-meaning ghost. They thought I didn't know what equity meant, that I didn't understand tax shelters, wire transfers, or digital footprints. They forgot I once sat in boardrooms where men twice my size stuttered over my silence. They didn't know that behind the soft cardigans and garden club meetings was a woman who had turned a funeral inheritance into an international nonprofit. I wasn't fragile. I was just done proving it. They all thought she had won, that she'd taken what she needed and buried the evidence beneath charm and curated smiles. But that was her first mistake, confusing the absence of noise with the absence of power. The second was believing the woman who raised her had forgotten how to fight. I wasn't just a mother. I was a strategist. One who had studied every piece of this betrayal as if it were a map. I had already built my exit, already sealed the doors, already planted the trap. She was still flaunting her new life on social media, showing off the kitchen renovations, the overpriced art she couldn't identify, and the luxury bath oils she tagged with hashtags like sign self-made. And I would scroll through every post like a mother watching her child build sandcastles too close to the tide. Let her have her stage. Let her play her part. What she didn't see coming was that I wrote the ending long before she even knew she was in a story. Let them all keep underestimating me. Let them keep calling me soft. It's always the quiet ones who know exactly where the matchbox is kept. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with intention. Everything was where it needed to be. The final documents filed, the signatures dry, the deed updated and stamped with finality. No lawyers called, no meetings scheduled. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted clarity. Irrefutable, unshakable clarity. And now, with the final paper in my hands and the power officially returned to its rightful owner, it was time. She'd been too loud for too long, too proud of a crown that never belonged to her, too confident in a throne she built with someone else's foundation. She thought I wouldn't notice that I'd keep smiling through her lies and sipping tea in her borrowed house like a well-behaved guest. But I had never been a guest. I'd always been the one paying the bills behind the scenes. She just never bothered to look. I picked up my phone, not in anger, but with purpose. I didn't rehearse what I was going to say. I didn't need to. The truth didn't need dressing up. It just needed to be heard. Once, and only once. I scrolled to her name in my contacts, the same one that used to bring warmth, now hollow and formal. Daughter. She answered on the second ring. Cheerful, oblivious. She always answered fast when she thought there was more to gain. Hi, Mom, she chirped. Everything okay? I paused for a moment, just long enough for silence to stretch across the line like a held breath. You might want to check the deed, I said calmly. No anger, no accusation, just a fact. A pause, confused laughter. What? Your house, I continued. You'll want to check the ownership records. I didn't wait for her reply. I didn't explain. I didn't offer a single syllable more. I hung up. The dial tone rang in the air like a closing bell. That was all it took. One sentence. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need volume to hit hard. Sometimes it only needs precision, and nothing pierces entitlement faster than loss. Real loss. Not theoretical, not emotional. Legal. Documented. Permanent. I didn't imagine her face, but I knew it. That blend of confusion and slow-building panic, the kind that rises in the throat when a person realizes the ground beneath them is no longer theirs. She would open her laptop. She would refresh the browser repeatedly, thinking it was a mistake. She would read my name where hers used to be. And then she'd realize, this wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. I placed my phone down gently on the counter. There were no fireworks, no victory dance, just silence, thick and final. Because when the game ends, the players don't argue. They surrender. She must have driven fast. I could picture it, her fingers gripping the wheel, her mind racing faster than the tires beneath her. She probably played that phone call over and over again, dissecting my words, my tone, searching for some hint of mercy. But there was none. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't threatened. I'd simply told the truth. And now the truth was waiting for her like a mirror she couldn't avoid. She arrived at the house just after noon. The security camera I had reinstalled captured everything in cold, high definition. Her car pulled into the driveway with urgency, the door swinging open before the engine even settled. She was wearing her favorite beige trench coat, the one she always wore when she wanted to look important. She approached the front door quickly, already fumbling in her purse for keys she hadn't realized were now meaningless. And then she saw it. The paper was taped neatly to the center of the front door. White. Unassuming. But it might as well have been fire. I watched her lean in to read the words. Her lips moved. Her eyes froze. The wind caught the edge of her coat, but she didn't move. She just stood there. The notice was brief. This property is no longer under the ownership of her name. Please direct all future correspondence to the legal title holder on file. No explanation, no apology, just a change of ownership. Permanent, irrevocable. I had paid off the loan 2 days earlier, quietly, cleanly, not through her accounts, not with her name attached. I handled it through my LLC, the same entity that now legally owned the property. Every trace of her claim had been removed, erased like chalk from a slate she never deserved to write on in the first place. The mortgage was gone. The debt was settled. And she? She was just a tenant in someone else's house. She just didn't know it until today. She didn't knock. She didn't cry. She didn't call me. She stood there for almost 10 minutes, reading the notice again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more palatable. But they never did. Eventually, she tried the doorknob. Locked. She bent down and peered through the mail slot, as if some hidden truth might be waiting inside to undo it all. Nothing. She stepped back, took in the house, the shutters she'd chosen, the potted plants she'd placed near the steps, the life she thought she'd built with confidence and charm, now stripped down to what it really was. Borrowed. All of it. And I didn't need to be there to watch her fall. The door did that for me. So did the silence. So did the truth, stapled to the wood like a verdict. The house was no longer hers, because she had stolen it with my name on it, and I had simply taken it back. There are decisions you make with fire, and others you make with ice. Changing my will was the latter. No heat, no emotion, just a pen, a signature, and a silence so complete it almost hummed. The office was quiet, carpeted, sterile, framed diplomas lining the walls like witnesses. My lawyer, a man I'd known for nearly 2 decades, sat across from me, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He didn't ask why. He already knew. The folder lay open between us, the previous version on the left, the updated draft on the right. In the old one, her name was everywhere. Beneficiary, executor, sole heir. Paragraph after paragraph, it was written with love and trust, and the assumption that she'd honor what I'd spent a lifetime building. That she would carry it forward, not as a prize, but as a responsibility. I had believed she would understand legacy. But now, those same lines had been reduced to white space. Her name was gone. Not redacted. Not transferred. Gone. There were no dramatic declarations. No speeches. I didn't rewrite the will with vengeance. I rewrote it with clarity. She had already decided what kind of daughter she wanted to be. I was simply responding in kind. Instead, I added new names. A scholarship fund in my mother's name for young women in underprivileged communities. A medical grant for families dealing with elder care, something I knew too well. And a quiet gift to the law firm that had once saved my husband's company from collapse. Out of gratitude, not obligation. The house she had stolen now belonged to me again, and in my will, it would go not to her, but to someone who needed a fresh start. A young woman I'd met through a nonprofit, raising her siblings alone, barely getting by. I had watched her work 2 jobs, take night classes, and still show up early to every meeting with a grateful look in her eyes. That house would become a home again, just not for the person who thought it was hers by default. When the lawyer handed me the final page, I read each line slowly, allowing the reality of what I was doing to settle in, not with guilt, but with a sense of peace. This wasn't punishment. This was a correction, a realignment of legacy, a silent closing of a door that should have never been left open so long. I signed. He sealed the folder, placed it in the locked cabinet behind his desk, and stood as I rose. He didn't say much, just nodded. We understood each other. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, something felt lighter, not like a burden released, but like a truth finally honored. A lifetime of inheritance, love, sacrifice, and trust was gone in a whisper. But sometimes, what you take back quietly makes the loudest sound. The world has a way of confusing discipline with cruelty. They see boundaries and call them bitterness. They see correction and call it revenge. But this what I did, it wasn't to hurt her. It was to wake her up. And waking someone up doesn't always sound like a lullaby. Sometimes, it sounds like silence. Sometimes, it appears to be a locked door with a name erased. Not because love disappeared, but because it finally stood up and said, "Enough." I didn't change my will out of spite. I didn't take back the house because I wanted her to suffer. If I wanted suffering, I could have humiliated her. Publicly. Legally. I could have let her drown in lawsuits and shame. I didn't. I kept it quiet. Clean. Surgical. Because this wasn't about destroying her. It was about stopping her. There's a kind of love that lets things slide, that smooths over betrayal for the sake of peace. I practiced that kind of love for years. I let things go. I excused the small lies. I forgave the entitlement. I chalked it up to growing pains, to her being just overwhelmed, just ambitious, just stressed. But somewhere along the way, she mistook mercy for permission. She began to believe that because I loved her, she could take freely. That love was a license to rewrite the rules. It wasn't. Love doesn't mean letting someone walk over you with your own name stitched on their shoes. Love doesn't mean watching someone take advantage of you and calling it generosity. Love, real love, sometimes means turning off the lights and walking out, leaving the thief alone with nothing but a mirror. I raised her with values, with care. I taught her that integrity is something you protect even when no one's watching. That who you are in the dark matters more than who you pretend to be in the light. But she chose a different path. And I couldn't follow her down it anymore. Not as a mother. Not as a woman. Not as someone who spent her life giving, only to watch her name become currency in someone else's empire. She needed to learn, not through words. She's had those. She's ignored them. She needed to learn through consequences. And not the theatrical kind. The kind that sticks. The kind that echoes. So no, I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it so she'd remember that love comes with truth. That you can't build a future on fraud and expect the foundation to hold. That a mother's silence isn't always surrender. It's sometimes a final mercy before the lesson begins. I still love her. That hasn't changed. But love without truth is just enablement dressed in kindness. And I decided that if she was going to inherit anything from me at all, it would be the lesson, not the fortune. The lesson was always worth more anyway. I didn't text. I didn't call. I didn't leave a voicemail laced with warnings or bitter goodbyes. That wasn't the language I needed to speak. Some truths deserve paper, ink, a steady hand that doesn't flinch, even when the heart does. So I wrote a letter, not typed, not printed, handwritten, from beginning to end. Because this wasn't a transaction, it was a reckoning between mother and daughter, laid bare in cursive. The house was no longer hers. The locks had been changed. Her key meant nothing now. And she hadn't returned since the day she stood on that porch reading the notice with disbelief in her eyes. But I knew where she was staying. A hotel downtown. Temporary. Shallow. Like everything else, she'd built on lies. It didn't take much to find it. Just one quiet inquiry through my lawyer. And that's where I sent the letter. Not through anger, through precision. The package was delivered the next morning. Sealed. Clean. No drama. Just a folder of truth. The legal deed, the mortgage release, the full change of ownership documentation, and my letter placed right on top. It said everything. It began with what I knew. The loan, the forged signature, the credit cards, and the hidden accounts. I named the banks, the dates, the amounts. I listed the storage unit, the calls, the fake voices. I left no room for her to claim confusion. I had the facts, and I laid them out like stones in a path she couldn't avoid. But then I told her the part that mattered more. I told her about the day I opened the envelope. The way my hands shook, but my face didn't. I told her about the moment I realized it wasn't about the money. It was about who she'd become. I told her how I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was calculating what truth would cost her, and what it had already cost me. I told her I loved her, still, that I probably always would. But that love had to sit behind a locked door now, that she'd used up the kind that comes with blind forgiveness. And what remained was the kind that tells the truth, even when it cuts. I told her about the house, that it was no longer hers, that it had never truly been, that building something on stolen ground never makes it yours. I ended with this. I taught you how to write your name. I never thought you'd use it against me. But I'm still your mother, and a mother's last gift is always a lesson. This was mine. I didn't sign it, Mom. I just signed my name. Because the woman she stole from deserved to speak for herself. And now, she had. The hardest part wasn't writing the letter. It was knowing she'd sit in a hotel room and read the final words from the only person who ever loved her without conditions. Not through a screen. Not in a court filing. But in my own handwriting. The same hand that once rocked her to sleep and buttoned her school uniform with care. And yet, as I closed the front gate behind me, I slipped the house key into a padded envelope and mailed it to her hotel, tucked alongside the letter. I didn't feel hollow. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. People think walking away is the breaking point. It's not. It's the healing point. When you finally realize that staying doesn't protect love, it preserves dysfunction. And I had preserved her for too long. Protected her from consequences. Shielded her from silence. Let her mistake my loyalty for permission. But not anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I didn't slam doors or stage confrontations in front of the neighbors. That's not how dignity leaves the room. Dignity gathers what belongs to it and walks out with steady hands. And that's what I did. Everything was still intact. My finances, my name, my peace. She hadn't broken me. She'd only revealed herself. And once the mask came off, I didn't recognize the face beneath it. That wasn't my little girl anymore. That wasn't the child who once cried when she lost her teddy bear or asked me to stay beside her after nightmares. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who thought love was leverage and loyalty was a weakness to be exploited. She may cry now. She may rage. She may try to reach out in weeks or months, spin new stories, or offer softened versions of the truth. But the door she used to walk through so easily has closed. Not in hatred, in finality. Everyone will ask, don't you miss her? Don't you feel like you lost something? Number. Because I didn't lose a daughter. She lost a mother. She lost the one person who would have stayed, no matter what. Who would have forgiven what others condemned. Who would have handed her a future without asking for payment. She lost bedtime prayers, handwritten recipes, and birthday calls that always came 5 minutes early. She lost the history we shared and the future we'll never write. But me? I still have myself. And sometimes, that's more than enough. The world won't understand. They'll call it cold, harsh, unmotherly. But they didn't hold that envelope. They didn't see their name twisted into a weapon. They didn't trace betrayal in the curl of a forged signature. So I won't explain. I'll just walk on with my spine straight, my legacy intact, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that choosing peace over proximity is not abandonment. It's survival. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood stains the carpet, while silence cleans the floor. I didn't share this story for sympathy. I shared it because some betrayals wear a smile. Some thieves use your last name. And sometimes, the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. They come from the hands you once held. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't break. I rewrote. I reclaimed. And then I walked away. Because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a letter left on a bed. A deed changed in silence. A will rewritten with no explanation. It's a mother choosing dignity over damage, truth over tradition. So if you've ever been betrayed by someone you raised, loved, or trusted, know this. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to say, not again. You're allowed to protect what's left. Because closure isn't something they give you, it's something you write yourself. And mine? Mine was sealed, signed, and delivered. Not with hate, but with finality. Thank you for watching. Her story is one of survival, truth, and finally choosing herself. To hear more stories like this, click on the left and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story found you, if it made you see yourself in ways you didn't expect, then know that you are not alone in what you've lived.